Welcome everyone to this week's Mortgage Minute. I'd like to go right into it. It's been an interesting week, especially as it regards interest rates. So, of course, as we usually do, I want to start with just an update to all of you as to where we're at with mortgage rates. And as you know, I always suggest go to our website. Right there on the homepage, we have our interest rate grid where it gives you indications of where rates are right now. And of course, don't forget at the bottom of that grid is a tab for about mortgage rates, where I go into more detail about how mortgage rates are determined from day to day. And when you look at this grid this week, it's a little bit of improvement. We're crawling back into the fives. When you look at this grid, for example, FHA, for example, is getting back into the 5 range and so forth. Now, what is going on? Why have rates improved this week? As you may recall, when you look at the 10-year bond chart, which Jeff will pull up here in a minute, last week it was looking not so good. The 10-year bond yield had gotten up into the 380s. In fact, end of last week, right before the holiday weekend, it got up to as high as 3.85. So that was definitely not a good trend. And at the time, I had suggested to everyone that I thought most of that increase in yield was probably due to the jitters associated with the debt ceiling talks. And I did make a prediction that if we can make some progress on that should calm the markets and we should see bond yields dropping. So what exactly did go on here this week that caused this change, this downward trend that we like to see? Well, of course, it was the fact that the the debt ceiling talks, actually during the holiday weekend, there was a news story that they had reached agreement in principle. But of course, that was still subject to votes, both by the House of Representatives and by the Senate. But in the meantime, just the fact that there was an announcement of an agreement in principle was enough to kind of calm the bond market as we opened up this week on Tuesday. Of course, Monday was a holiday. So as a consequence, that's when we started to see this improving trend. And it was interesting because there was a little bit of a divergent reaction in the markets. The stock market has actually been kind of down all week up until today, actually. Whereas, so the Dow Jones Industrial Average was lower most of this week. The 10-year bond yield dropped. That's a good thing. Now, remember, when you're talking about bonds, there's an inverse relationship between yield and price. So a lower yield means a higher price on the bond. So in that respect, it was a sort of a divergent reaction. Stock prices down, but bond prices up, which bond prices up is a good thing because that drops the yield. So what else was causing this improvement beyond the fact that we made progress on the debt ceiling talks? Well, the other thing that came up actually a couple of days ago was euro inflation. The inflation rate in the European markets had gone lower. So I think that was also a kind of a secondary effect that helped with our bond yields this week. And the other thing that came out this week was comments by 2 Fed officials, one a Fed president and the other a Fed governor, both who had suggested that the Fed might actually pause, or as they like to describe it, skip another Fed funds increase at the June meeting, which comes up in a couple of weeks. Now, what does skip mean? Well, what they're trying to say there is not necessarily that the Fed is going to stop with raising the Fed funds rate, but there's a growing sentiment that maybe they'll just skip doing anything in the June meeting, look at more data, and then reconsider any further increases after the June meeting. So that's what's being suggested now, which I think is also a contributory factor in getting our bond yields lower. And in fact, even a pretty well-known guy, Jamie Dimon, some of you may have heard of him. He's the CEO of Chase Bank. He even chimed in to suggest that the Fed may want to pause or skip doing anything in June to again reassess data and then see where we go from there. So all this is good news. The trend is back in the right direction. In fact, right now, as we're doing this show, the 10-year bond yield now has dropped just below 3.6, about 3.59. So a little bit more improvement, and we'll see how that plays out for the balance of the week and going into next week. But I think the trend is now back in the right direction. So with that, that's your update on current level of mortgage rates and bond yields. Thank you, everyone for watching. Stay tuned for next week. And remember, we've got the answers and they're on the house.